Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kevin Mackey. I am the Program Design and Quality Assurance Director for War Vision Somalia. It's a bit of a way of some background. I've been in the Somalia program since 2008 in various capacities. I began first with emergency response in South Central Somalia, then transitioned to programming team, then transitioned to emergency response director, and then operations director, and my newest role is program design and quality assurance director. So I've seen various sides of our program over the years, and I would say that this presentation today is kind of a summary of our experience as World Vision as we've learned to adjust to increasing lack of humanitarian access. And please excuse my presentation skills. I'm notorious for making very lazy but very wordy. I'll try. This is more for me to remind me what to say. So please pay more attention to what I am saying, not what's on the screen. That's just more of a mental cue for me. As I said, World Vision Somalia, World Vision in general, I think is very much like IOM in the sense that we normally, in most contexts, implement directly. If you look at the 100-odd countries that World Vision operates, the majority, 90%, 95%, you will find that World Vision implements about 100% of its projects directly. That's with having staff on the ground, field offices, all the logistics to provide support to those various offices and sub-offices. Just about a bit of history about World Vision Somalia. We say we began in 1989 in Baidoa. At that time there was a famine, there was a bit of displacement taking place as some warlords were moving into Baidoa, and that's when World Vision began operations there. Another key milestone, I guess you would say, for World Vision Somalia is when we became the Global Fund principal recipient. At that time, we made our first foray into partnering with local organizations and INGOs for the implementation of TB control program throughout Somalia. At present, we still are the principal recipient of this program, and we work through 22 partners covering 68 facilities in 64 districts. So that was our first foray into implementing outside, not implementing ourselves, but implementing through others. And that started in 2006. From 2008, that's approximately when I joined. I joined in January 2008 to 2010. What we witnessed during that time was decreasing humanitarian access. To give you an idea, I used to travel from Wajid by car all the way over to Baidoa, all the way down near Middle Juba. I used to travel between Sako and Salagla, all in a vehicle. Okay, there was none of this flying around business. We drove around. Obviously, we had escorts, but we were able to move around and had a fairly good ability to oversee our projects. But from 2008 to 2010, that humanitarian space shrank, and it shrank more and more. At that time, there was a lot of kidnappings taking place of international staff, hostage taking, etc. We had colleagues and friends next door to us in the ACF compound who were kidnapped and held for a long time. So the space increasingly shrank. So as an organization, we had to take a look at our operational approach in a very strong and critical way. In the fall of 2010, World Vision Somalia, like many other organizations in South Central, our offices were raided by the Al-Shabaab. As some of you might recall, approximately about that time, Al-Shabaab was making a final push against Villa Somalia. They were taking a lot of casualties at the time. And unfortunately, World Vision happened to be sitting on the largest supplies of medical drugs in South Central during that time. So they hit our warehouses in Wajid, they hit our warehouses in Middle Juba, and effectively we were removed from the context at that point. But even before that time, we started to have our expatriate field-based staff less and less in the field and started to develop remote control modalities. And I'll explain some of the lessons that we had in that process. Late 2011, that's the Famine Declaration. World Vision Somalia at that point had been largely concentrated in Puntland and Somaliland, and we had avoided returning to the south. However, given the necessities, humanitarian prerogative, we returned to the south, first doing a cross-border operation where we had an office in Dolo Ado, Ethiopia, and then crossing the border daily into Dolo, Somalia. We chose at that time, made a very strategic choice as an organization to take the partnering experience that we'd had from 2006 to 2010 to 2011 through our global fund and expand that and take a look at when we return to the South, we would return largely implementing through partners. War Vision Somalia today, last year we were $67 million program. We have 44 implementing partners. We implement in 64 districts, and 40% of our budget is implemented through others. So 60% is still implemented directly, but 40% of the 67 million is implemented through a network of 44 partners. Okay. Key considerations. Now, as I said, this was more of a journey than the deliberate process. We witnessed from 2008 to 2010 shrinking humanitarian access. And as an organization, we sat down and we started to say, okay, what are the key things as an organization that we need to take a look at when we're considering any move towards remote management? And the first one that came up as an organization is duty of care. Duty of care is very important, and I'll elaborate on that. Second, we looked at robust and redundant monitoring mechanisms to make sure that we could ensure that we were meeting the obligations that we had made to our donors with regards to what we said we were going to do. And then community perception. So I'll delve into these three topics as part of the presentation. Duty of care. That's where I'll go to my notes. Okay, I think it's important to recognize, and having worked in Somalia in a number of different capacities, from managing projects on the ground to overseeing all the programs on the ground to designing the projects, any choice to move to a remote control management, whether that's reducing expatriate staff footprints on the ground, limiting expatriate time on the ground, or moving to work with local NGOs, represents a transfer of risk. Okay? Anytime that you're providing assistance through either your local staff or your local implementing partner, and you are not able to provide direct oversight, occasionally you are transferring risk to those individuals. And an organization that makes the decision to go to remote management or management through partners needs to have a very clear-eyed understanding that when you are no longer placing neutral individuals with no interest and no stake in the context, and you pull them out of a situation, then you are leaving the local staff who are very involved in the context. And when you work in a complex setting like Somalia, where there's a lot of pressure being put on local staff and implementing partners, you have effectively transferred risk to them. There is significant pressure, and we know this from hard experience, but also dialoguing with our staff. Some of our staff have been with us for 15 years. That there is significant pressure placed upon staff to reallocate resources to armed groups, to clan interest, to family interest. Therefore, organizations must think about creating processes that try to help alleviate that. So the solution, first and foremost, for things like fiduciary risk, governance risk, etc., a careful assessment of the skills and abilities of your field staff and your implementing partners is the first step. If you're choosing, for example, to continue to implement directly as an organization, but only doing it through your local staff, you need to make sure that your local staff have the skills that they need to succeed. Okay? And the people that you might have hired, for example, at both your expatriate level and your local staff level, to implement directly with managers on the ground, might not be the same people you need for an indirect model. Okay? Some managers need to be on the ground. They need to do the vehicle plan every single day. They have great difficulty releasing that control and turning that over to local staff. When you have a manager who's unable to let go, you don't have a successful team. Okay? But then secondly, too, if you're going to work through partners, make sure your partners have the skills to succeed, okay? A lot of times, and in a lot of contracting models that I've seen in the Somalia context, people contract out to organizations to do a job, okay? They contract out them to do something on time, on target, and within budget, okay? A local organization, which might have been turning over $50,000 in diaspora funding for 5 years, running a number of health clinics, and all of a sudden you show up with $350,000 to $550,000, and you expect that organization to be able to absorb and account for that, I think you're placing the local organization in a compromised position, but you're also compromising yourselves, okay? So it's very important that when you think about duty of care, you've got to think of duty of care of your partners' reputations, their ability to absorb, because you'll ruin their name, particularly nowadays, right? Particularly nowadays with the RMU, the risk management unit through the UN, and all these systems that people are looking at. Once an NGO makes a mistake, it gets out. So you've got to think about what kind of responsibility you're transferring. What risk are you transferring onto them? They will always take the money. They'll never tell you no. Okay? They'll never tell you no. They'll tell you, oh yeah, I could do a health project. Give me $200,000 extra. They'll never tell you no. Okay? But you, as the organization, must do your due diligence to make sure. And for your staff, you also need to make sure. Okay? Establish creative deferral mechanisms to shield staff from pressure. We do this quite a bit, and I'll give you a few examples. The most clever one that the field teams came up with, and this is a normal kind of situation that happens often in Somalia, is with vehicle hire. They were under tremendous pressure from the local administration and the various clans to hire certain vehicles, to circumvent our process and policies to hire vehicles associated with clans. Now, and the local administration was blocking them from being able to hire those vehicles because they were trying to stick by the books. So what we did is we created a new mechanism. It's very simple. It was very creative of the field teams, is that we introduced, we had an initial criteria for the vehicles. The vehicles must meet certain safety standards. Then they go into a pool of vehicles. Then they go into a hat, and they're drawn out of a hat. And God decides. Okay? And it helped us ensure that as an organization, we were trying to sustain our systems and our processes so they wouldn't be corrupted. And at the same time, they created a shield so our staff could say, God decided. So you just have to be creative about these kind of these things. Develop creative processes, which introduce elements of chance, like I just described. The second one is establish decision points, decision gates in key processes. So inevitably, you're going to end up in situations whereby you're hiring vehicles, you're hiring staff, you're renting facilities, you're entering into contract. These are resources. Anytime you're doing any of those four things in Somalia, you are having trouble. Okay? And if you relinquish that, for example, to your staff at the field level, the pressure that they come under for those four things is tremendous. Sometimes their lives can be threatened. Sometimes the lives of their families can be threatened. So you must always think about creating decision points that are outside of their control. So a good one is we entered into a newly liberated area a few years ago. And the pressure that was put upon the team was very strong. So we created process flows whereby certain decisions were made by expatriates at Nairobi level or at Dolo level or at different levels that weren't in that location. Then we went down to the community and we showed them the process charts. And we said, this is the way the process is going to run. The guy can advertise. Shortlisting is actually done through our automated system. Then the actual selection of them is done by the technical person in collaboration with two other technical people. This is how the process runs, okay? And you showed that to the community leaders. Now, this is a funny story. I went through about an hour-and-a-half meeting with 20 elders, okay? The meeting ended. We had the process charts on the wall, glued. The chief elder remained. And he wanted to talk about other things. Within 5 minutes of remaining, he told me, hey, I've got a cousin that needed a job. Okay? Because he discovered my staff were no longer the touch point. It was me. Okay? I told him, I actually pointed to the wall. Okay? 5 minutes after that, he told me he needed a vehicle hire. And I told him, and I pointed at the wall. So just because you have this meeting once they discover that you're the decision point, it's not going to, they're going to come at you. But you have to be ready for that. But it's a very clear demonstration of how that process actually plays out. And there's a whole host of ways you can do this. Robust and redundant monitoring mechanisms. Lack of external, context-neutral expatriate management or technical personnel exposes local staff and our partners to pressure to divert resources, tempt staff and our partners to misappropriate organizations' resources, and undertake poor implementation and falsify reports. Okay? I don't know if this is new to anybody, but it's just sometimes important to understand that with these kind of pressures, these are the realities that you're facing. Okay? You can have a young, enthusiastic staff member who wants to be honest, but geez, it's the only job in Baidoa and he screwed up. Okay? He's messed something up. How do you create an environment or a context where he can admit a mistake instead of falsifying reports, right? I mean, that's it. So you have to create an environment where the staff know that it's better to tell the truth than to falsify. So robust and redundant monitoring mechanisms. Establish multiple independent monitoring mechanisms. I've just given a few that we sometimes use. Third-party monitors, local administration monitoring, peer review monitoring. That's different sectors from different locations monitoring each other's projects. The point of all this is make it too expensive, too politically difficult for staff and gatekeepers to collude. Okay, the more people that know about what's supposed to be happening in a project in a specific way, it makes it expensive to collude. I think I'll come back to it a little bit more. Ensure anonymous feedback mechanisms. I think we all do this. A lot of people do. Phone in or boxes or whatever. Ensure community members are well informed of projects and benefits. And sometimes this requires that the expat go down and be the honest person who does a day trip in if it's a very hostile area and explains the project, explains in detail the project. Like I said, increase the cost of collusion. The more people involved, the more people have to be bought out. So make that latrine expensive. If the local administration knows you're building that latrine to a BOQ, if you have a monitor, then your own team that knows how the BOQ is supposed to be done. If you have a community feedback mechanism on the same latrine, you've made that latrine very expensive to steal or divert. Okay? Continue. Develop and sustain networks. This is a continuation of redundant and monitoring mechanisms. Leadership management relies heavily on reports from the field level staff and our partners. The organization's understanding of ground realities are vulnerable to bias and manipulations of field level staff. Just another reality, okay? Develop a wide range of field level contexts, especially with NGOs and INGOs. It's important to coordinate, not for the benefit of coordinating, but just so that you know other people on the ground and that your field staff know that you know other people on the ground. It's very important that they see that. So what I'll oftentimes do is I will write to someone in another organization and copy my team so that they see I know that person. Or when I know someone who's an expatriate from another organization going to a location where I don't visit very often, I'll say, hey, meet with my team. Something like that. So they know that you know. Okay? Cultivate, and where possible, relationships with community leaders, UN officials, and these contexts. Put these people on your Skype. Get to know them. Shoot them emails. Tell them you're coming by. So that they feel obliged to tell you rumors. Because if you're at the ground level, there's a swirl of rumors going around all the time. And there's always a little bit of element in that swirl. It's the truth. It's always helpful to hear that swirl. Field level staff and partners see that you have extensive field level contacts. It's not enough that you tell them. They need to see it. They need to see you writing people, right? You're trying to create an atmosphere for the staff where they feel that it's better to tell you the truth if something goes wrong than simply lie on the report. Encourage teams to engage with these entities. They are not working in isolation. The more that they're locked into the coordination mechanisms, the more that they're talking to people, the more the information is out, the more buzz there is about, the more people know about your projects and what you're supposed to be doing. So it's good to be linked into other people so that you can create this kind of, like I said, atmosphere where staff don't have a lot of options to hide bad things when they happen. Bad things happen because sometimes staff make mistakes. You want those kind of people to be able to admit their mistakes easily. Sometimes things happen because there's fraud, and those are difficult. But it's about finding the difference between the two. Community perception. Removing unbiased management and technical specialists can impact communities' perception of the organization's neutrality. Okay? When you remove unbiased individuals from the location, community leaders who come from different groupings, whether those are clans or tribes or whatever, will look at your staff and will immediately identify your staff as a clan or a tribe and then as an organization later. So you must recognize that that's what they see when they see your staff sometimes. It's not that they see, oh, that's an IOM staff or that's a World Vision staff. They will first go back to their cultural default, which is, oh, this is the Isaac clan, or this person's a Kikuyu, or da-da-da-da. They will naturally default to that. So you have to recognize that when you remove neutral people that are neutral to the context, the organization's perception is first viewed through your local staff, whatever they might be. Deliberate efforts to reduce the organization's visibility can negatively impact the community's understanding of what the organization does. Okay? When you don't put up signage, when you don't mark everything that you give out with your logo, the communities might know you're there, but they might not know what you're doing, right? And so, because they're used to, in many places in Somalia, that everybody brands everything, right? But then all of a sudden you've decided as an organization to take low profile and nothing's branded, okay? Sometimes I'll give you another funny example. We at one time used to brand our latrines. Then we decided to no longer brand our latrines. But then we discovered another NGO was actually claiming our latrines for their latrines. So what we did is we painted all our latrines bright orange. So they couldn't claim our latrines, okay? But you can see how that process of confusion can take place, okay? Solution, senior leadership engagement with local community members, providing regular updates on ongoing and future projects. Every organization has its profile, its security risk profile, and everyone will make decisions based on that, whether they can go. But we've always tried to find that even if it's a day trip at the beginning of a project, that someone neutral to the context goes down and tries to talk to the community leaders, explain to them the projects, explain to them the deliverables, so that the community can see it coming from someone else, and then they can do whatever they need to do to spread the word themselves. Obviously, there's the challenge of gatekeepers, and maybe your community leaders won't pass the message on, but it's a step I think we always feel it's important to do. As I talked about earlier, these deferral mechanisms. Community leaders have clear understanding of policy, process, and procedure of the organization, especially around issues of recruitment, procurement, vetting of partners, etc. Anything that results in resource leaving your organization and going to the community. It's helpful if senior leadership, neutral to the context, can go and have those discussions with the community so that they see that, oh, okay, this is the process, and this is what the organization says is the process. Community leaders have a clear understanding of the deferral mechanisms which have been put in place to broaden decision-making beyond the field-based staff and partners, and why these processes are in place. So just like I said, in the example I gave, met with 20 elders, explained 2 processes, had them in nice little flowcharts, and the minute that I got the chief elder alone, he realized that I was the guy to ask, not my staff. So these messages have to just keep coming and be repeated and be repeated. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of it. Let the world know. Let the community leaders and community know what you are doing. That's very, very important. And it's very important that that comes from someone neutral to the context. Deferral mechanisms, let them know. Let them know that our staff have some decisions that they can make at the field, but there is a process through which decisions are stopped, or there's someone outside of the context which can help in that decision. And then protect your brand. I just used this. This is my national director meeting with the community elders in Baidoa, right? He's down there, he's explaining a project, he's explaining exactly what's going on in the project, how we're going to implement it, the processes and procedures that we're going to use. So, you know, in places like Somalia, if they see the bosses saying it, I think that sometimes helps. And so getting the senior leader out and having them say what the processes and procedures are is very helpful. So I think that's the end of my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm also happy to sit down and go away. Yes?
You said 40% of your partners are on contracts?
Yes, we have 40% that are, we implement 40% of our portfolio through partners. We have 44 partners.
Could you explain why?
Okay, I'll explain each program and maybe that will help. So we have a global fund program, which we do TB control in 68 facilities in 64 districts through 22 partners. There's one UN partner, there's one third-party monitor partner, there are 20 local and INGO partners within that network of partners. We have a WFP countrywide program. In that program, we do nutrition and resilience, and we have 11 partners. Then we have our SOMREP, which is our Somalia Resilience Program. This is a large livelihood resilience program. We have 6 international partners, and then they have a series of subs underneath them. And then there is our, I like to call it our bilateral grants, and these are OFDA, Government of Germany, Government of Canada, $1 million one-year projects that we implement through a network of about 8 or 10 partners in the South. So that was WFP Global Fund. Yeah, that's it. So that's our network of 44 partners. Now in the North, largely, we implement directly. So that's the 60% of our portfolio that we implement directly. Oh, sorry. And we've recently, I would say in the last 12 months, with the emerging states in Jubaland and in Southwest State, we're actually partnering with the nascent ministries and treating them as if we would treat a subrecipient. We, as an organization, have made some decisions. We wanted to move beyond the contracting model. I think for a very long time we were in the contracting model, which was, I'm going to give you just enough resources to finish this project on time, on target, and budget. We're moving more to, and we called that giving them operational capacity, okay? We have moved in the past, I'd say, couple of years to working on their organizational capacity. We call it, inside ourselves, our mothering approach. We have 12 expatriate staff in the South, based in the South, and their role is to work very closely with these partners. I mean, partners are in our office daily, getting some sort of feedback or something with our different kind of staff members. And we help them in things like supply chain. We help them in things like finance. We help them in things like, we put them through a program management certificate course. We put them through, it's called G2G, it's for USAID grants. It's to teach them all the things that we know about how to get a USAID grant. So we are very deliberate about trying to build up their governance systems, their finance systems, their supply chain systems, and we put expatriates very close to them so that financial reporting regime is very tough. And what you discover with this kind of regime is that you start to know about partners. And it's not about knowing their profile and then funding them or whether they report well. It's knowing their assistant finance officer is useless, and we need you to remove your assistant finance officer. And if an organization takes that kind of frank feedback and does something about it, they stay. If they don't, we find another partner. And you're able to kind of pinpoint the problems when you know the people that are involved. So that's kind of why we call it our mothering approach. It doesn't always work. We've lost a few partners. Some people have said, this is too overwhelming. You know too much about us, right? But we prefer it that way because once you get past year one, you know them pretty well. You get into year two, you know them even better. So, and because we're investing so much in terms of capacity development outside of simply, here's some money, do a project, if they're smart and they want to develop into a more functional community-based organization, then they take this feedback because they're getting other things. They're getting training, they're getting certifications, they're getting a lot of things that help them as an organization compete against us one day. I mean, that's kind of our, we want to train them so that they can compete against us one day. So that's kind of, how our partnering has evolved over time. Yes?
When you're doing your partner selection,
Yep.
you find where the government gets involved, and they define that they want you to work with someone, how would you go?
Yep. I'll give you an example. No worries. We returned to a newly liberated area a few years ago, and I was there at the meeting, and it was the first time the governor had called this meeting. And hundreds of entities showed up. And the first thing the governor said is, I know half of you are fake. And then he went on his tirade of, I know you've stolen this community's money, blah, blah, blah. And then, they put in a very strong process to narrow down themselves to about 80. Okay? So they went from 100 and I couldn't tell you how many people in the room. The room was just packed. And so there was a lot of pressure in that process to take on certain people that they wanted. And that's when we, at least for the partner vetting, that was one of the systems that we had to introduce at the field level and tell the community, this is how our process functions, right? And by having that very clear and robust process flow, the staff were feeling massive pressure to hire certain NGOs. But because we removed that and we said, this is this process, we were able to somehow get around it. I mean, we ultimately, I feel everyone in our team felt that our partner vetting was we got who we wanted, we didn't feel pressure, but we had to at some point come in to that situation because the staff were under tremendous pressure from the government, from the clans, from everyone. And they are the ones who reached out to us and said, look, help. And so that's when we came in and we developed that particular process flow. Because like I said, it's procurement, it's vehicles, it's partner selection, and it's staff hires. If you can be smart about how you create process flows around those kind of things, create very good deferral mechanisms, then you'll solve a lot of problems and you'll also help your staff be more honest with you. Because at the end of the day, you can have the most honest woman or man at the field level, but if they're fearing for their lives and they're fearing for their families, they will compromise. So, yeah.
For IOM, we also do a lot of the bidding process from the Nairobi side, and similar. And then with regards to partner, I actually have a question. Do you work with, or do you select partners per project? Or are some of the partners like long-term, beyond a certain project, you continue working without new rounds of selection process?
Okay. I'll start with selection. Okay. For some grants, so for Global Fund, for example, The Global Fund grant is unique in its vetting process because there's the Health Sector Committee, which plays a large role in defining which partners are viable to actually apply for the grant. So there's an initial vet that takes place based on that. So that clears out a large number of competitors for that. So that's one way that the vetting takes place. And then obviously we vet them using PricewaterhouseCoopers and da-da-da-da. It's a very elaborate process for those particular ones. For the ones that have been, for example, the WFP. The WFP has been more of a, what would I say? They suggest some of their better partners and then we vet them. Sometimes we say yes and sometimes we say no. Okay? Sometimes we say we think this one is better. Sometimes we fire the one that they give us after 6 months. So, we have a lot of freedom in that space. And like I said, not everybody really, either they're very interested in learning and growing as an organization, or they don't want to be watched at all. And we don't want to be working with the ones that don't want to be watched at all. Okay? And that comes out pretty clearly, especially when you have guys on the ground, right? That are trying to say, hey, I'm in the town you are in. Can you come and visit me? There's no excuse. It's not like you're living in Nairobi and saying, hey, can you get on a plane and come to me, right? You're saying, I'm in the town you're in, right? Come. So there's far less of the games that can be played because you've got people closer to them. So that's, and then, for example, the bilateral. The most complicated one is the bilateral because we're doing that based on a geography. So we're going into a geography, and that's when you're going to enter into situations where you're going to have a lot of local pressure because they know that you're hiring partners within a geography, or you're likely to hire people within a geography. Okay? That's the hardest one. The other ones, because there's already kind of a pre-vet that takes place, the community has less pressure points, but when you're doing it based on a locality, then you're having to create a process where you're choosing between the local available market. And then obviously many local NGOs are associated with particular clans that have particular interests, and if you choose one from this one, then that one is left out. So it's a much more complex. So those are the three kind of vetting. And then we have a very extensive vetting, and if you have a very robust vetting that has multiple layers of vet, and the community see that you have multiple layers of vetting taking place, then they kind of back off because they see, wow, this is a process. But we've never been bullied. I'll say that. We've never been bullied into taking a particular partner.
I've asked that because I think UNICEF, for example, they already have a pool of implementing partners
Yeah.
who meet their standard. So they usually know who to work with from the get-go. Versus for us, we have a global procurement procedure that we have to follow. It's quite a complex bidding process that takes up like at least a month or two of implementation for short-term projects.
Yeah.
But I mean, for fairness, I think we all have to go through it, but oftentimes it's also a challenge in terms of the timeline. Yeah.
And I'd always vet. I'd always vet other agencies' vets because the local staff of other agencies are also under pressure. And the longer they've been in the field, the more likely that they've been under pressure for a very long time. Okay, so we always vet our partners' recommendations. So that's just a bit of advice. So there's been several processes which have helped narrow down the number of implementing partners at the field, but I would always urge anybody to vet, to re-vet. Because what we discovered also, too, is the burden of our, for example, financial reporting is much, much heavier than, for example, UNICEF's. Like, ours is dramatically much more than theirs. And so what we demand of our partners in terms of financial reporting is the ones who come from UNICEF sometimes, they struggle and they complain. They just complain like, this is crazy, all these receipts you need, and stamps and da-da-da-da. But that's our process, right? That happens to be our process, and they have to either step up to that level or not. So there's several things you need to be careful of. Is one, what level of systems and processes do the other partners have. And then secondly, be very cautious about their vet, because they have all the same pressures and challenges that I just described that our teams go under. And if they haven't put in the deferral mechanisms, you might be getting a bad vet. So, yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.